The crystal chandeliers of the Chateau de Lumière didn't sparkle. They glared. I walked toward the head table in a midnight blue silk gown I'd bought specifically to remind my husband, Julian, that I was more than just his efficient operations manager. But as I reached for the chair next to him, my hand froze. It was already occupied. By Chloe. And on her chest sat the sterling family emerald, the heirloom that was supposed to be mine. Julian didn't even stand up. He just swirled his vintage Bordeaux and chuckled, a sound that echoed in the sudden silence of the dining hall. Chloe is handling the family PR tonight, Elena, he said, his voice casual, as if discussing the weather. You can grab a plate in the staff kitchen. We need you to check the catering anyway. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. The humiliation was absolute, hanging heavy in the air like smoke. Panic is a waste of energy, so I didn't make a scene. Disruptions are inefficient. I just nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked away. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The walk from the head table to the double oak doors took exactly 45 seconds. I counted every step. Behind me, the muffled sounds of laughter and the clinking of silverware resumed, the Sterling family already moving on, erasing me from the narrative before I had even left the room. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded less like a departure and more like a countdown. I didn't slam the doors. Amateurs slam doors to make a point. Professionals close them quietly to seal the trap. The night air outside was thick and humid, the kind of heavy French summer heat that clings to your skin the moment you step out of the air conditioning. I walked across the limestone bridge that connected the private island estate to the mainland. It was a narrow, elegant structure, illuminated by recessed lighting, the only tether between the Chateau de Lumière and the rest of the world. Looking back serves no functional purpose. I simply unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and enjoyed the silence. I took a breath, reached into my bag, and pulled out my iPad. The screen came to life, casting a cool blue glow over my hands. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady. I opened the application labeled Estate Command, a proprietary piece of software I had personally coded 18 months ago when I negotiated the lease for this venue. Julian liked to brag that the chateau was fully automated, a marvel of modern luxury. He loved the tech, but he never understood the code. He forgot that, while he paid the monthly subscription, I held the administrative keys. On the screen, the chateau appeared as a 3D schematic, pulsating with green status lights. Lighting, active. Climate control, active. Security, disarmed. Network, online. It was a living, breathing organism, and I was its central nervous system. My finger hovered over the master control panel. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a system reset. First, I navigated to the perimeter protocol. I selected the main gate and the pedestrian bridge access. I tapped lockdown mode. On the screen, the icons turned from a welcoming green to a harsh, impenetrable red. The heavy electronic gates at the end of the driveway would now require a biometric override that only I possessed. Next, I scrolled to utilities. The chateau was essentially a glass box, a greenhouse designed to trap heat without its industrial-grade cooling system. I found the HVAC controls. Target temperature, off. Ventilation fans, disabled. I watched the digital thermometer reading steady at 72 degrees. Within an hour, with the body heat of 20 people and the humidity of the vineyard, that number would climb to 90. Finally, the network. I found the fiber optic uplink that provided the high-speed Wi-Fi and cellular boosting. I didn't just pause it. I severed the connection at the localized server level. I tapped execute. A soft chime from the iPad confirmed the command. Through my rearview mirror, I watched the result. The recessed lights running along the bridge behind me didn't just fade. They snapped off, one by one, plunging the only exit path into total darkness. The glowing jewel of the chateau remained lit from the inside, pretty and bright, but disconnected from the world. A beautiful, glass cage. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving my husband and his family to enjoy their dinner. They wanted privacy. I just gave them solitary confinement. The Hotel St. Pierre was a converted monastery, sitting high on a hill overlooking the valley. It was quiet here, the kind of silence that costs 700 euros a night. I checked into my suite, set my laptop on the mahogany desk, and ordered a sparkling water. No wine. Alcohol dulls the cognitive faculties, and tonight, I needed to be sharp. I sat by the window, looking out at the distant darkness where the Chateau de Lumière was currently sealing itself shut. For the first time in 6 years, I let myself ask the question that had been scratching at the back of my mind since the wedding day. Why? Why treat me like an interloper in my own marriage? The answer wasn't emotional. It was structural. The world saw the Sterling family as old money, a dynasty of endless wealth and impeccable taste. But I knew the truth because I was the one balancing the books. The Sterlings were asset-heavy and cash-poor. They were a beautiful vintage car with no engine. Julian liked to call himself a venture capitalist, a visionary in the tech space. But visionaries need execution, and Julian couldn't code his way out of a paper bag. 6 years ago, when his crypto firm was tanking, it wasn't his father's money that saved him. It was my algorithm. I spent 3 weeks sleepless, rewriting his back-end architecture, stabilizing the platform, and saving him from an SEC inquiry. When he wanted to buy the penthouse in Manhattan, the bank laughed at his debt-to-income ratio. They didn't laugh at mine. My company, Vance Systems, provided the collateral. I realized then, sitting in that hotel room, that I had fallen into the most dangerous trap for a competent woman. I had made myself useful. I had become the invisible architect of their lavish reality. I negotiated the leases. I managed the tax shelters. I structured the loans. To them, I wasn't a wife to be loved. I was a high-functioning appliance to be used. You don't thank your refrigerator for keeping the milk cold. You don't write a love letter to your Wi-Fi router. You just expect them to work. And you only notice them when they stop. That comment about the staff kitchen wasn't just an insult designed to hurt my feelings. It was a Freudian slip. It was Julian admitting exactly where he categorized me. In his mind, I was staff. I was the help. I was the person who made things run so he and Chloe could play dress-up in the spotlight. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master spreadsheet of our finances. I looked at the columns of numbers, my capital, my credit, my labor propping up their lifestyle. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug. It keeps you trying to prove your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. But the fog was gone now. If Julian saw me as a service provider, then I would treat this marriage like a business contract. And when a client stops paying, insults the vendor, and breaches the terms of service, you don't process that as heartbreak. You process it as a liability. You terminate the account. I looked at the time. It had been 40 minutes since I left the dinner table. The temperature inside the glass-walled chateau would be rising. The realization was about to hit them. They thought they had discarded a wife. They were about to learn they had unplugged the main generator. The first vibration against the mahogany desk sounded like an angry hornet. I watched my phone screen light up. Then again, and again, a cascade of notifications began to roll in, breaking the stillness of my hotel room. I didn't pick up. I simply watched the preview messages scroll by, analyzing them like data points in a failing system. Julian 11:12 p.m. Wi-Fi is down. The music stopped. Fix the router. Now. Julian 11:14 p. Are you ignoring me? This is childish. Turn the AC back on. It's getting stuffy in here. Victoria 11:18 p. Unacceptable. Elena, I'm melting. If my guests are uncomfortable, I will sue you for breach of contract and emotional distress. Fix this immediately. I took a sip of my water. The predictability was almost boring. This was the first phase of what psychologists call narcissistic collapse, the rage. When a narcissist loses control, they don't feel fear, they feel insulted. They couldn't conceive that the staff had locked them out. In their minds, I was just a malfunctioning appliance. They weren't hostages yet. They were just dissatisfied customers demanding to speak to the manager. but they didn't understand the physics of the environment I had secured for them. The Château de Lumière was an architectural masterpiece, predominantly constructed of triple-paned, distinctively thick glass. During the day, it was stunning. At night, without the industrial ventilation system cycling fresh air, it was essentially a hermetically sealed terrarium. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene. 20 people in formal wear, consuming alcohol and heavy food. 50 beeswax candles burning on the tables, consuming oxygen and outputting heat, the latent heat from the stone floors, the humidity of the surrounding vineyard seeping against the seals. By my calculation, the temperature inside the main hall would be rising by about 2 degrees every 10 minutes. The scent of expensive Chanel and vintage Bordeaux would soon sour into the smell of sweat and panic. Another notification popped up. This one was from Instagram. Chloe. I tapped the screen. It was a selfie taken with the flash on, creating a harsh, unflattering contrast against the dark background of the unlit chateau. She was holding a battery-operated candle near her face, pouting. The caption read, "Power out at the chateau. Roughing it like refugees, lol. Drama vintage vibes." She had no idea. I switched apps back to the estate command center to check the status of the plumbing. The smart sanitation system was a feature I had installed to prevent flooding and manage the estate's delicate septic balance during the off-season. When the house went into lockdown mode, the system automatically engaged the solenoid valves on every water line. The sinks wouldn't run. The showers wouldn't turn on. And, most critically, the smart toilets' Japanese models that required electricity to function would lock their lids and refuse to flush. Julian 11, 35, p. The gates are closed. The code isn't working. Elena, pick up the phone. This isn't funny anymore. Julian 11, 37, p. Open the gates. The tone had shifted. The imperious boss voice was cracking, replaced by the first tremors of genuine alarm. They had tried to leave. They had marched to the heavy iron gates at the end of the causeway, expecting them to glide open, only to find themselves trapped on the wrong side of the bridge. They were realizing that the glass walls weren't there to keep the world out. They were there to keep the specimens in. The rage was fading. The panic was setting in. And I was just getting started. I silenced the notifications. Responding to Julian's tantrums would only validate his delusion that this was a negotiation. It wasn't. It was an eviction. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master contract for the chateau rental. This was where my obsession with detail, the very trait Julian mocked as boring, became my weapon. Because I had booked the venue through my limited liability company, Vance Systems, to cover the insurance liability, I was the sole signatory. Not Julian. Not Victoria. Me. I scrolled down to Article 7, Section C. The clause I had insisted on adding during the negotiation phase. Force majeure and intellectual property revocation. I opened a legal template and began to type. It wasn't an emotional letter. It was a formal notice of unauthorized occupancy. To Mr. Julian Sterling. Please be advised that the event agreement for the Château de Lumière has been terminated effective immediately due to non-payment of the guaranteed deposit. As the leaseholder of record, I have revoked all access privileges. You and your party are currently trespassing on private property. You have 0 minutes to vacate the premises before local authorities are contacted. I converted the file to a PDF. I attached it to a text message. I hit send. That was the legal kill switch. I had stripped them of their guest status. Now, if the police arrived, they wouldn't be mediating a domestic dispute. They would be removing squatters. While I waited for that reality to land, I decided to do one final sweep of the accounts. I needed to ensure my company's assets were completely decoupled from the Sterling Family Trust before I filed for divorce in the morning. I logged into the joint investment portal, the one Julian thought I didn't have the password for. I started filtering the outgoing wire transfers for the last 18 months. I expected to find the usual evidence of infidelity: jewelry receipts, hotel stays, perhaps a leased Porsche for Chloe, and I found those. But then I saw something else. A recurring monthly transfer of $800,000. Labeled simply as consulting fees. I frowned. Julian didn't use consultants. He barely listened to his board of directors. I clicked on the transaction details. The recipient was a shell company called Apex Horizons, domiciled in the Cayman Islands. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I ran a search on the business registration number. It was buried under layers of privacy protections, but I knew how to dig. I traced the IP address of the digital signature used to incorporate the shell company. The IP address didn't trace back to a law firm in the Caymans. It traced back to a residential address in Connecticut. I pulled up the property records for that address. The owner was listed as Thomas Hughes. I froze. I pulled up Chloe's social media profile. I scrolled back 3 years to a Father's Day post. "Love you, Dad. Best financial advisor a girl could ask for." The man in the photo was Thomas Hughes. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. I pulled the total sum of the transfers. $14.5 million. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a midlife crisis. It was a heist. Julian and his father hadn't just been cheating on me. They had been systematically siphoning capital from my tech firm's liquidity pool, laundering it through Chloe's father, and hiding it offshore. They were bleeding me dry. The plan wasn't just to divorce me. It was to bankrupt me and leave me holding the bag for the tax liability while they vanished into the sunset with the nest egg I had built. The genre of my life just shifted violently. 5 minutes ago, I was the protagonist of a divorce drama. Now, I was the star witness in a federal white-collar crime thriller. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. I opened the contact for the FBI field office in Boston. The game had just changed. I didn't just want them evicted. I wanted them indicted. It was 3:03 in the morning, the witching hour, or, in this case, the breaking hour. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the iPad propped up against my knees. On the screen, the grainy night vision feed from the chateau's security cameras played out like a silent black and white horror movie. The narcissistic collapse was now in its second phase, the implosion. The elegance of the evening had evaporated. Victoria Sterling, the woman who once critiqued the thread count of my guest towels, was sitting on the stone floor of the foyer. Her back slumped against the locked front door. Her Chanel gown was crumpled, and she was fanning herself frantically with a dinner menu. Even in the grayscale footage, I could see the sheen of sweat on her forehead. The greenhouse effect had done its work. The temperature inside was likely nearing 95 degrees. Chloe was curled up on a velvet bench, her phone dead in her hand, no longer posting selfies. And Julian. Julian was pacing. He looked like a trapped animal, throwing his shoulder against the glass, shouting at the darkness. My phone rang. The screen flashed, "Husband." I took a sip of my espresso. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I wanted him to hear the silence. I wanted him to feel the void where my immediate compliance used to be. On the 4th ring, I tapped speakerphone. "Elena!" His voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, aristocratic baritone was gone, replaced by a high, breathless rasp. "Elena, thank God. You have to stop this. Mother is faint. We can't breathe in here. The water won't run. Open the gates." "Right now. I can't do that, Julian," I said, my voice steady, sounding loud in the quiet hotel room. "What do you mean you can't?" he screamed. "Just log into the app. Hit the unlock button. We are dying in here." "I don't have access anymore," I lied. "You see, the system administrator privileges are reserved for the leaseholder and immediate family. And as you clarified so publicly tonight, I'm not family, I'm just staff. And, since I'm staff, I officially resign." "Stop it," he sobbed. "Stop the games. I'm sorry about the table. I'm sorry about Chloe. We can fix this. Just open the door and we can talk. We have nothing to talk about, Julian. But you will have plenty to talk about with the authorities." "The what?" He went still. I watched him on the screen, freezing in the center of the room. I saw the accounts. "Julian," I said, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. "I saw Apex Horizons. I saw the $14.5 million you and your father funneled to Thomas Hughes. On the screen, Julian's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to hold himself up. I forwarded the ledger to the FBI, I continued, and I sent the trespassing notice to the French gendarmerie. They aren't coming to unlock the gates because you're uncomfortable, Julian. They're coming to arrest you for international wire fraud and embezzlement. No, he whimpered. Elena, please. I'd look out the window if I were you, I said. The blue lights are very pretty against the vineyard. I didn't wait for his response. I hung up the phone. On the iPad screen, I watched Julian drop the phone to the floor. He turned slowly toward the window, his face a mask of absolute terror. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the end of his life. The checkmate was complete. The king had fallen. The sun rose over the vineyards of Bordeaux like a judge entering a courtroom, solemn, inevitable, and blindingly bright. I stood on the balcony of my hotel suite, wrapped in a plush white robe, watching the finale of the play I had directed. From this distance, the flashing blue lights of the gendarmerie looked almost festive against the soft morning mist. 10 minutes ago, I had finally tapped the unlock command on my iPad. I didn't do it to save the Sterlings. I did it to let the consequences in. I watched as 3 squad cars crossed the bridge I had kept in darkness all night. The heavy iron gates swung open, not to welcome guests, but to admit the law. Through the telephoto lens of my camera, I saw the procession emerge. Julian came first, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned, his face gray with exhaustion. He wasn't walking with the confident stride of a tech visionary anymore. He was being guided by an officer, his hands cuffed behind his back. Behind him, his father, Alexander, looked frail and small, stripped of the arrogance that had allowed him to steal $14 million without blinking. Victoria was escorted by a paramedic, a foil blanket wrapped around her shoulders, looking less like a matriarch and more like a ghost. And Chloe. I didn't see Chloe. She was likely still inside, answering questions about her father's shell company, realizing that her #drama had just become a federal indictment. The Sterling dynasty didn't end with a bang. It ended with the quiet click of handcuffs and the slamming of a police cruiser door. I turned away from the railing. On the small bistro table, a double espresso sat steaming. Beside it lay my wedding band. It was a beautiful ring, a 3-carat diamond that I had technically paid for myself. I picked it up. It felt light, insignificant. I held it over the dark surface of the coffee. There was no sadness left to process. No anger left to burn. Just the strange, weightless sensation of gravity releasing its hold. I let go. The ring disappeared into the black liquid with a dull plink, burying itself at the bottom of the cup. A small, dark grave for a dead marriage. I picked up the iPad one last time and deleted the Estate Command app. The screen went black. I took a sip of the coffee, avoiding the sediment at the bottom. It was bitter, strong, and hot. It tasted like freedom. If you enjoyed watching the architect burn down the house she built, hit that share button. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you've done that finally made you feel free?